you for joining UE Press and our authors for Black History Month 2012 on our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/UEPress. You can get a free chapter from each of the 4 books being highlighted this afternoon on our website at www.uepress.com. Also, the first 3 persons to write UWI Press on our Facebook wall before each presentation will win a copy of one of these books. Remember to press the like button if you enjoy the presentation. This afternoon, our authors will speak to the question, how have the experiences of the enslaved and the effect of slavery in Jamaica been reflected in their book? Please join us in welcoming Miss Annie Paul, Head of Publications Section, Senior Publications Officer at Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, University of the West Indies, Mona, as she speaks to her book, Caribbean Culture, Soundings on Kamau Brathwaite. Welcome, Ms. Paul.
Well, my book, Caribbean Culture, doesn't deal directly with the experiences of the enslaved, so much as engage in theorizing, analyzing, and examining the culture inherited from them and from the plantation complex as a whole. You might say that the entire book is concerned with the effects of slavery because Caribbean culture is produced by and large by the descendants of the enslaved and those who maintain them in slavery. While the book engages critically with the work of Kamau Brathwaite and is dedicated to him, many of the authors use various aspects of his work as a point of departure for their own carefully researched and articulated treatises. Brathwaite himself spent a lot of time excavating the history and culture of the enslaved by thinking about how the African culture brought to Jamaica and the Caribbean by the enslaved became creolized, and by extolling the virtues of the oral traditions they brought with them. The book is divided into 7 sections, the first focusing on orality, both in terms of ancestral heritage, as expanded on by Kofi Anyadoho, a prominent Ghanaian scholar, and Maureen Warner Lewis, who studies the origins of Caribbean Creole languages, as well as contemporary speech acts and forms such as calypso, or what Hubert Devonish calls performance speech. So the first segment is called Ceremonies of the Word. The next section is titled Jar Music and Dub Elegy, Soundings on Kamau Brathwaite and Mikey Smith. Then there's part 3, which is The Sea is History, Tidalectics, Middle Passages and Migrant Crossings. And part 4, Creolization, Historiography and Subalternity. Part 5, Resurrecting the Human Face from the Archive. And part 6, Creole Bodies, Dancehall Style, Gender, Sexuality and Representation in Jamaican Popular Culture. Part 7, which is the final section, is called Jamaican Identities and Globalization, Citizenship, Subalternity and Cyberspace, because I wanted to show how Brathwaite's range was so wide and diverse that not only was he a historian who delved into the past and tried to find out more about what happened to the enslaved, but his work was so diverse that it can also be applied by scholars today who are looking at the cyberspace, at new media and film and dance hall even, So interestingly, Cecil Gutsmore in his chapter, Whose Worldview Rules, actually contests whether Brathwaite actually used slavery as an object of analysis. He was critical of Brathwaite's theory of creolization, but I thought it worth including his essay because I didn't want the volume simply to be an uncritical celebration of Brathwaite. The section that comes closest to detailing enslaved experience is section 5, which is titled Resurrecting the Human Face from the Archive. Historian Vereen Shepherd's chapter, Resisting Representation, deals frontally with the problem of reconstructing the life stories of the enslaved and enslaved women in particular. Given that they weren't taught to read and write and almost never had time to record their experiences in ways that would travel to later centuries. As she says, quote, despite the endemic anti-intellectual culture bred by slavery, many Africans wrote important treatises, dictated autobiographical accounts, presented critical oral testimony to commissions of inquiry, and made arrangements for the recording and publication of a wide body of opinions which formed an important part of the Caribbean literary tradition. Douglas Chambers' article, which is on figuring the slave trade, he calls it, opens with an account of a young enslaved man called Brutus, who ran away from his new master in Black River in 1791. What you may find interesting in this article are Chambers' attempts to track the ethnicities of the enslaved. In their article, Adoon and Lovejoy discuss an Arabic manuscript left behind by one Muhammad Kabba Saghanugu from a coffee estate named Spice Grove in Manchester Parish. This chapter illuminates the history of enslaved African Muslims who ended up in Jamaica. Today we don't think immediately of a Muslim heritage in relation to the enslaved, but just as it is today in Africa, 2 centuries ago there were parts of Africa that were Muslim in religious background, and some of the enslaved people who were brought here were Muslims. This is something that I think doesn't get enough exposure. So I'm going to read a bit from what Vereen Shepherd says. She, in her chapter, she says, I wish to suggest in this chapter that one solution to the problem of recovering the enslaved woman's voice is for us to increase current efforts to mine sources that ventriloquize their voices. So she has this concept of, ventriloquism, which, means throwing your voice, making other people speak is the way in which she's using it. So what she means by ventriloquize their voices is to study contemporary historical and literary texts, including novels, newspapers, dictated letters and narratives, reports of commissions of inquiry, records of trials, and court records generally. Skeptical as we may be about their authenticity and the source of their authority, these sources may allow us to make some progress towards discovering what enslaved women thought about slavery as institution, their own status as enslaved laborers, slave society in general, the behavior of their enslavers, and the project of emancipation. In fact, in her chapter, she goes on to examine several novels and to reconstruct the sort of body, literally, of the enslaved from the novel, to recuperate the persons of these enslaved people from the novel. And some people may think, how can you do that? Novels are fiction. But remember that the people who write novels are human beings, and very often they rely on things that are actually happening around them. So in a strange kind of way, novels capture reality, and this is why people study. You sort of read Charles Dickens to find out what was going on in the London of his time, and you'll find that many historical details are accurately represented in his novels. So so I just thought I would read, I would just leave you with that, with what Vereen Shepherd said about how she recuperated the voices of some of the enslaved. Another interesting detail, just briefly, from Douglas Chambers' chapter, he actually deals with ethnicities. He tries to figure out what the ethnicities of the enslaved were. Were they Igbo, were they Congo, were they Mongola, Mandingo, Moko, Coromantee, and he tries to trace this and give you actual numbers of each of these groups that came to Jamaica.
We'd like to thank you, our viewers, for logging on to our Facebook page, and also thank our authors, Annie Paul, for sharing with us just now.